We have with us Mr. Kamath to guide us as to what is the milieu in which we see the world. The CFO of the day is faced with an extremely challenging global environment and an evolving domestic situation. Arguably, the domestic situation is much better, but there is a lot that the CFO has to tide. And we have the perfect person in Mr. Kamath, a person who has given this country some fine institutions, a bunch of them, one after the other. Twin insurance companies, an AMC company, all of them leaders in their respective spheres. Of course, the bank, ICICI Securities, and now continuing in public service in the field of infrastructure financing, where he heads NaBFID. Infrastructure financing will be one of my questions. It's a puzzle India has not cracked very well. But Mr. Kamath, thank you very much for joining us. Well, first up, if you can parse the global environment, do we, not just CFOs, but even the ordinary investor and employee, have to worry something about the global environment? Can we see something cataclysmic in the US regional banks, or something else in terms of global financial dislocation?
Thank you, Latha, and pleasure to be here sharing thoughts with the CFOs. Cataclysmic, no. I don't think there's anything cataclysmic that is. Because we have had now almost 2 years in terms of the second year of an evolution in terms of several things. One is conflict, consequences of the conflict, inflationary situation, unwillingness to adjust interest rates. Then I would think half-heartedly increasing interest rates. Typically, you would have said that's India. No, it's not India. Someone else. The wild. Now I call it the Wild West. This was supposed to be the West, which would show us what to do things, and in a way told us what to do things, and we followed. But they broke ranks and they did differently, and nothing has happened, which is cataclysmic. They are suffering, but it's not cataclysmic. So I don't think anything cataclysmic will happen there. And we, I think, have managed ourselves pretty well, thanks to both the government and the Reserve Bank in keeping interest rates right, liquidity right, and taking interest rates or moving them as they thought warranted. In hindsight, every step looked right. So nothing cataclysmic.
Okay. You don't think the regional banks will throw a surprise?
Yeah. Again, they have now time to digest what has happened. So they will now figure out what to do with price increases or rate increases or rate decreases, so that you maybe even change regulatory requirements to make sure the soft landing. So I'm sure it's already done. No regulator will wait after you had a challenge of the sort 2-3 banks had. No, they would have done it.
Okay. It's just that after Lehman, around every corner one sees these ghosts. But let me come to the more promising story, like we began, the India growth story. At any point in time, does it feel like you felt in 2002 or 2003? Are we at the start of a long runway? It is important, because if we are imagining ourselves somewhere in like 2015 with still broken cycles of growth, then a CFO has to behave differently. But if you're seeing yourself in a decent runway of growth, the CFO has to reorient himself differently. Where do you see?
I'll start by saying that the runway is very long, and I'll explain why. And since you mentioned 2002, let me put 2002 in context. 2002, we were actually coming out of the challenges of the 1990s. The 1990s challenge was basically post-liberalization, and our companies, which were, I would call laboratory scale plants. They were not commercially viable plants. In a protected environment, they could survive. High interest rates, everything managed, and the banking sector cluttered with, between restructured and NPAs, Kalpana is here, between 25 and 30%, I guess, was the book which was impaired. And corporates equally impaired, leveraged, what is it, 4.5, 4.7 times net worth, if you take long-term and short-term. You juxtapose it today, we're talking of a completely different set of numbers. You have a banking sector where NPAs are less than 0.5%, net NPAs for the top 5 banks. Then you've got the banking sector, which is basically has got a whole lot of leverage which is unutilized. And we can put that also in context. I am amazed. ROEs are almost somewhere between 20 and 25%. And Kalpana and I did the planning. That would have been not even an aspirational number. We said going beyond 15% is virtually impossible. And here you are running 20 and 25%. And what does it mean? So that CFOs to share the thought that you are now a perpetual engine. You don't need any more capital. It will generate capital on its own for all growth that you would have. And the other side is the corporate. From 4.7 leverage, if you look at the top 500 companies in the country today, you will hardly find a dozen of them with the leverage of even 1:1. I am from the pre-EBITDA era, so I don't use EBITDA as a multiple. I use debt to equity. It can be linked to long-term equity or debt to short-term equity. So if you look at that multiple, 4.7, and now we are at, for maybe a small set of those, 0.5:1. The rest of them no debt. So banks are flush with money, ability to leverage. Corporates have clean balance sheets, ability to borrow. So I think your runway now, you have to determine how long is it, because you have the ability to invest. There's one significant difference between then and now. 2002, even in 2002, it took almost 2.5, 3 years for not a full greenfield project. Greenfield only something more to implement. Now we are talking of, for a balancing or a modernization project, less than 1 year to add capacity. So given that, you got all the levers in your hands today. So
you played into my hands, sir, because I thought of capacity or building capacity expansion as really the key question. Now, however you look at the numbers, the capacity, the capex is, or investment as a percentage of GDP, is nowhere near what it was in the times I spoke about. 2003 to 2010, or even up to 2015. We are running at less than 14% investment to GDP ratio. Yeah, I mean corporate. Yeah. And time was when we were at 25%, 2008, your times, when the bank was under your stewardship. Capex has not begun. How much ever we like to delude ourselves, don't you think?
You played into my hands now. See, in 2000, 2003, we didn't have the capacity at all. We were, we had, as I was saying, our plants are all laboratory scale plants. First, those plants had to be junked and you had to put in new capacity. So that happened. And there was a whole lot of investment happening. The incremental pie there was really infrastructure, which for the first time you had the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, and then the power projects, the telecom projects, early port projects, all those started happening. You look at today, and you give me a really good opening here. And I've got a wonderful audience who I will, with their permission, use as a dipstick. So you say, add capacity. I want to just show of hands. How many of you are running capacity utilization more than 85% today? 1, 2, 3, 4. So you answer. So they are not utilizing capacity fully. So where will they invest? They don't need to invest. And today, in 2002, they would have been already in investment mode because it took them 4 years to invest. Today, they can do the investment in less than a year, get the plant up in less than a year. So they are deferring that investment till such time as they see actually demand overtaking that. And demand is not sluggish because something structurally has gone wrong.
But that is the fear, sir.
No, I'm just coming to that. Demand is sluggish. Demand is not sluggish. Otherwise, you would not have had your 6 or 7% growth. So it's just that in the last few years, they have built capacity. And I can actually say, where will we run out of capacity? All building block industries, we will run out of capacity. Whether it is steel, cement, all building materials, anything required to infrastructure, we will first run out of capacity. Then this will create a virtuous cycle which will create opportunities for other sectors. Along with one area, I think of what I call the digital or the services area, which I'm sure you will want to talk about that, and you are one of the first ones to identify that. The services sector, that is onshore services, the sort of employment that is coming about here, that is creating opportunities which we never thought of. That happened in 2001, 2002, but that time it was not these were IT companies. And CRISIL had a survey then that for every white-collar job created, there are 5 other jobs created. I would dare say today that for every white-collar job created, there are 6 to 7 other jobs created, and they will provide the momentum to other industries. So Give it a year, capacity utilization when they see at around 85, 90, they will...
There is a school of thought which fears that we have had a skewed growth, the familiar K-shaped recovery. And therefore, for some basic staples, the demand is not growing, or at least growing, far less than we are used to. That the potential of the economy is not now 7% or 8%, but somewhere lower. Those are the fears I was, wanting to hear.
No, I again don't agree with that for a reason. You see, that that's K-shaped or V-shaped, I don't want to delve that path, but I see this as a long-term growth which is not going to be impaired. The reason is, the question one needs to ask ourselves is, do we have what is required to grow? That's a basic question. Now, if you look at other growth stories, starting with Japan or whether it is Southeast Asia, more recently China, when growth happens, it goes on for a long period of time. So that itself, in a way, puts in context the phraseology we use, Amrit Kal, a 25-year runway. But you don't need to use phrases. You just look at it practically. Every city in India has to be rebuilt. So urban rejuvenation. And you see the amount of connectivity that is required, whether it is road, rail, ports. You drive on any road in India, or you just go on YouTube and watch people going around, every road is crowded, which means there is more capacity required, more lanes to be added, and so on and so forth. So I would think in the infrastructure side, a 25-year horizon, I think, is a given. In other areas, it is going to be periodic growth, in the sense that you will build capacity, you will then probably have 20% extra capacity, you will absorb it over the next 3 years, then you will start building again. So you will see that episodic growth. But in infrastructure, it is going to be one continuous outlay. And I also want to add to that the new driver, which is the digital economy. Just look at the numbers, China and India. What is it, 5-6 years back, digital economy was about 15% of overall GDP. Last count now, what numbers people are putting out, 35 to 40%. Where are we? Maybe 5 to 10%. I don't have precise numbers. But where will you go? Will it go to 35, 40%? I don't know. Will you go to 20, 25%? For sure. I think that 20, 25% is going to be on top of whatever numbers today are being put out there. 6, 7%. You add 25% to that. That is our, I think, growth that we should aspire for, and I think is feasible over a long run.
No, I get your point. It's not the business cycle that you're looking at. Okay, let me again look at a near-term fear. We just had the FDI numbers coming out from the Reserve Bank, and they are distinctly lower than the year ago. Okay, year ago we also had a lot of private equity and VC money floating around. But if you looked at net FDI as well, we're kind of stagnating around the 30 billion a year mark. And there are rumblings of, again there is a problem with land acquisition. And okay, let me get your view first on this. This 20% TCS, what is your view about that, sir?
I have no view on this. This is something for
I'll tell you what
the government to have view. It is not going to impact what we are doing, or it's not going to
it's just a feeling that we have not yet cleaned up ease of doing business. Would that be something that worries you?
This has anything to do with that at all. There could be other areas which the government has acknowledged in terms of ease of doing business. And the government itself has said that there are a whole lot of corrections to be done. I'm sure that's going to be a work in process and will be done. It needs to be done, clearly, if you talk to business. But I don't think that's a proximate cause for FDI. The FDI, the way I look at it is...
I'm not correcting FDI and TCS, but I'm saying there are rumblings that ease of doing business is tough, and that explains that FDI is not really taking off despite PLI.
I think FDI, a slowdown is given, but then we need to understand what really are the causes. To me, from my perspective, the causes really would be, I think, the events around the world. People are not in a position to invest today. They are reassessing their own future. Can you imagine any European company really wanting to put money now without understanding where they are? And for that matter, the US, you do not know whether you are in a recession or you are in a growth phase. How will you invest? And Japan is no different. So large pools of capital which would have come this way and made investments on their own behalf, it's not happening. Then you come to the PE guys and the VC guys. You know what's happened here. Yes. So I think in a way the initial investors themselves have to in a way, blame themselves for creating a position. It'll grow. If we grow at 7%, plus there's a digital opportunity, FDI will happen on its own.
how do you see digital changing finance? I mean, you are in one such a company yourself. Do you see banks looking very different? Do you see banks getting dwarfed and something else taking its place? How can you draw the future for us, say 10 years down?
Yeah, if you look at what has happened in the last 3 years, the future is very clear to me. That is, the digital revolution is overtaking various sides of various aspects of the financial services business. You look at broking, broking has gone digital. Asset management is about to go digital. I would think general insurance, well on the way there. When it comes to life insurance and banks, not fully. In banks, all payment side has gone digital. So it's basically you are protected by a moat, a regulatory moat for good. You have to be cautious with public money. But other than that, you're getting chipped away at the margin. So what do? Either you reinvent yourself or the pressure on regulation to basically force you to change is going to be so much. Either you change or entry of other players will happen. Yeah. Luckily, things are not as difficult as they could have been, say, 4 or 5 years back. Because if you go by what I said earlier, basically fit hai kya, free hai kya, then I think you have got solutions today within these two ambits. There are platforms today available, at least for financial services, which are completely plug and play. And it's end to end. What I would have had, let's say, 20, 30, 35 systems working together and making them work together to run a bank. Today is one integrated system, out of the box. You pay on a SAS basis, and it is ready to go. And the cost is, what is it, 1/10, 1/20th of what you are spending today. So a bank with courage, I think, can very quickly remap itself and get into the new digital. And otherwise, I think they will not be able to go.
So the banking system is not challenged by fintech?
It's not challenged only because of the regulatory moat. If these players were allowed, let's say, a whole host of things that otherwise banks are allowed, then the situation would have been different. Maybe rightly so, I said, because they have to prove themselves. So in course of time, that will happen.
Let me come to the ship that you are navigating at this point in time, or that you are heading at this point in time. Infrastructure finance, NaBFID really. At the moment, the fisc is under pressure all over the world to bring down the deficit which was incurred during the COVID years. So while government capex, central government capex is doing very well at this point in time, it is still, I just did the math before I came here, it is along with the states 4% of GDP and about 12% of total capex in the country. So it can't move the ship alone. Fisc can't fund infrastructure alone. How do you see this happening? Banks are still financing retail. We really don't have infra financing.
Yeah, banks, of course, last 3-4 years were also financing infrastructure, which is, you can say, is it appropriate or not is a different question, because they were basically saying they're doing term transformation, but really not doing term transformation. You were resetting the loans every so often, and carries, you carry then a risk in your books and in your borrowers' books. But that I leave it to the CFOs of those borrowing companies and their risk committees, if I'm sure they have one. And on the bank side, similarly. So that's a different story. But the real providers of funding for this opportunity and need that the country has will be the long-term savers. It is the insurance companies, the pension funds. So that is going to be the route. And as you see, the change is already visible. If you look at bank growth in deposits, maybe just around double digits, 10 to 11, I think it's not an accident. There are other, I think, sources coming up, which probably the saver looks at giving him a better fit, better interest rate, and so on. And those are growing. So particularly is insurance and other long-term type. So you're getting into a situation which we actually did not have in 1996 when we had to convert to a bank. That is, there was one basic provider of long-term money, there was LIC, and all others were short-term providers who gave you long-term money. But today the situation is different. So you have these long-term players, plus you have access to the market itself, not only for NaBFID, but for people with a track record from, say, the corporate infrastructure sector. So I see over the next 5 years, multiple sources of funding opening up. through NaBFID and other long-term sources to provide that bridge as we go along. A. B, I think something important we need to keep in mind as to what has happened with, say, NHAI. It's a brilliant story in positivity that NHAI created those assets which PPPs could not create. Now you have implemented those, so the implementation risk is over, the operating initial risk is over, and now in a de-risk state they go to market. And they market money directly from the marketplace. So I would think that NHAI now is a perpetually funded machine. They don't need to either rely on the government nor on NaBFID. If they need to put those assets in the market, they do it through an InvIT structure and out. Now imagine, like NHAI, in almost all areas of infrastructure, various private companies do the same thing. They may not yet be ready today, but in another year or two, they should be ready to do this. For a variety of assets which are with a clear track record and positive cash flow, I'm sure there will be savers. And last time I interacted with Mr. Gadkari, he was saying that I will now make monthly interest payment directly into a bank account on the InvIT, the bond. So, with this sort of innovation possible today because of technology. So far banks had a field day, but now any other market participant can do this. So I think in a lateral way, a lot of these problems will get resolved without our realizing it. Like UPI solved a lot of problems.
Oh, yes, of course. So that's the last question. What do you think? What is the next coming from NaBFID? Should we be prepared for a headline?
No, NaBFID headline, you should talk to the CEO. That's it.
All right. Pleasure speaking with you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Kamath. We come with grave doubts about the disruptions to the economy, to the business ecosystem. But with 50 years of spearheading several ships, all those look eminently handleable. Thank you very much for infusing this optimism.